The old wooden church sat quietly on Maple Street, its white paint peeling slightly around the edges. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the worn carpet. The smell of old wood and fresh flowers filled the air as families slowly filed into their usual spots. In the third row from the front, a young mother sat with her 7-year-old daughter. The woman's clothes were clean but clearly bought from discount stores. Her shoes had been polished to hide the small scuffs, and her purse was an old one that had seen better days. Despite her tired appearance, she smiled warmly at her little girl, who was busy coloring in a children's Bible book. The little girl swung her legs back and forth, her feet not quite touching the floor. She wore a yellow dress that was slightly too big for her, probably bought with room to grow. Her hair was neatly braided, and she kept looking around the church with wide, curious eyes. This was clearly a child who found wonder in simple things. Behind them, about 2 rows back, sat a man in an expensive navy suit. His watch gleamed in the morning light, and his shoes were polished to perfection. He looked out of place in this humble church, like he belonged in a boardroom rather than a small-town sanctuary. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket, but he ignored it. Something about this place felt different from the large, formal churches he usually attended when business required it. The pastor, an elderly man with kind eyes and graying hair, stepped up to the pulpit. His voice was warm as he welcomed everyone to the service. The congregation wasn't large, maybe 40 people total, but there was something special about the way they all seemed to know each other. Neighbors waved at neighbors and children whispered excitedly to their friends. As the service began, the businessman found himself watching the mother and daughter in front of him. The little girl kept whispering questions to her mother, who patiently answered each one in hushed tones. When they stood to sing, the woman's voice was soft but beautiful. The little girl tried to sing along, making up words when she didn't know them, which made her mother smile despite her obvious tiredness. During the offering, the businessman noticed something that made his chest tighten. The mother carefully counted out a few crumpled dollar bills from her worn wallet. She hesitated for a moment, then added one more bill to the pile before placing it in the offering plate. It was clear that every dollar mattered to her, yet she was giving anyway. The little girl watched her mother count the money and whispered, "Are you sure we can give that much, Mommy?" The mother bent down and whispered back, "God has been good to us, sweetheart. We always share what we can." The businessman felt a strange stirring in his chest. He couldn't remember the last time he'd thought twice about money, let alone counted out bills so carefully. His weekly spending on coffee probably exceeded what this woman made in a day. As the service continued, the pastor began talking about prayer and faith. He spoke about how God hears every prayer, especially those that come from pure hearts. The little girl perked up at this, sitting straighter in her seat and listening with intense concentration. "Now, let's bow our heads for prayer," the pastor said gently. "Take a moment to speak to God about what's on your heart." The church fell silent except for the soft whisper of the air conditioning and the distant sound of birds chirping outside. Adults closed their eyes and folded their hands, lost in their own thoughts and prayers. But the little girl had different plans. In the quiet of that sacred moment, her small voice rose clear and innocent above the silence. She didn't whisper, like the adults around her. Instead, she spoke to God like he was sitting right next to her, the way children do when they believe completely in something. "God," she said, her voice carrying through the still air, "I just want a father for Mommy." The businessman's eyes snapped open. He looked around and saw that others had heard too, but the little girl wasn't finished. "She works so hard every day, and sometimes I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm sleeping. She tries to hide it, but I know she's sad. She tells me that having me is enough, but I think she's lonely. I have friends at school, but Mommy doesn't have anyone." The mother's shoulders began to shake slightly. She kept her head bowed, but tears were clearly streaming down her face. The little girl continued, completely unaware of the effect her words were having on everyone around her. "I know some kids don't have daddies, and that's okay. But I think Mommy deserves someone who will love her and take care of her like she takes care of me." She's the best mommy in the whole world. God, she makes me pancakes in funny shapes and reads me stories even when she's tired from work." The businessman felt his throat tighten. He watched as the mother reached over and gently took her daughter's hand, trying to quiet her without making a scene, but the little girl wasn't done. "I don't need a daddy from me, God. I mean, it might be nice, but I really just want mommy to be happy. She deserves someone who will bring her flowers and make her laugh. Someone who won't leave like my real daddy did." The innocence in her voice was heartbreaking. Here was a child who had never known a father's love, yet her only wish was for her mother's happiness. The businessman found himself blinking back tears, something he hadn't done in years. "I promise I'll be good if you send someone nice for Mommy. I'll clean my room without being asked, and I'll eat my vegetables. I'll even share my toys with the other kids at church. Just please, God, send someone who will love Mommy the way she deserves to be loved." The church remained silent as the little girl finally finished her prayer. The pastor, who had been listening, with tears in his own eyes, waited a moment before gently continuing the service. As the congregation began to stir, the businessman couldn't take his eyes off the mother and daughter. The woman was discreetly wiping her eyes, clearly embarrassed by her daughter's public prayer. She whispered something to the little girl, who nodded solemnly. The businessman felt something shift inside him. He had attended church services before, mostly for business networking or social obligations. But this was different. This innocent prayer from a child's heart had reached something deep within him that he thought was long buried. He thought about his own childhood, growing up with a single mother who worked multiple jobs to keep them afloat. He remembered the loneliness in her eyes, the way she'd smile for his sake even when she was struggling. He had promised himself that when he grew up, he'd never let anyone he cared about struggle like that again, but somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what it felt like to care about someone else's struggles. His success had built walls around his heart, and he'd grown comfortable in his isolation. Now, watching this little girl and her mother, he felt those walls beginning to crack. The child's selfless prayer had reminded him that there was still goodness in the world, still people who loved without expecting anything in return. As the service ended and people began to gather their things, the businessman found himself wanting to do something, anything to help. But what could he do? He was a stranger to them, and his world was so different from theirs. The little girl turned around as they were leaving, and her eyes met his. She smiled brightly and waved, the way children do when they see something that makes them happy. In that moment, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The simple, pure connection between two human beings. He watched as the mother and daughter walked out of the church together, the little girl skipping alongside her mother, chattering about the service. The businessman remained seated, lost in thought about a prayer that had changed something fundamental inside him. Outside, he could see them through the window, walking toward an old car that had clearly seen better days. The mother was digging through her purse, probably looking for her keys, while the little girl helped by holding her Bible book and the small purse. He realized that this moment, this simple Sunday morning in a small church, had affected him more than any business deal or acquisition ever had. A child's innocent prayer had reminded him of what really mattered in life, and he wasn't sure he'd ever be the same again. The businessman sat in his car for nearly 20 minutes after the service ended, watching the last few families leave the church parking lot. His driver had been waiting patiently in the black sedan, probably wondering why his boss was taking so long. Usually after business-related church visits, he was ready to leave within minutes of the final blessing, but today was different. The little girl's prayer kept echoing in his mind, and he couldn't shake the image of her mother's quiet tears. He had built his fortune by making quick decisions and moving on to the next opportunity, but something about this moment made him want to slow down and really think. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about Monday's board meeting, but for once he didn't feel the usual urgency to respond. Instead, he found himself thinking about his own mother, who had passed away 5 years ago. She would have loved that little girl's honesty and pure heart. She always said that children could see things adults missed because they hadn't learned. To complicate simple truths yet, the next Sunday, he surprised himself by telling his driver to head back to the small church on Maple Street. He had 3 other church services he could have attended, all in more upscale neighborhoods where he might network with other business leaders. But something pulled him back to that humble building with the peeling paint and worn carpet. He arrived a few minutes early and chose a seat in the back this time, not wanting to seem like he was intruding. The same families filtered in, greeting each other with warm hugs and genuine smiles. There was something refreshing about a place where people seemed to care more about each other than about appearances. The mother and daughter arrived just as the service was starting. The little girl was wearing a different dress this time, blue with tiny flowers, but it was also clearly second-hand. Her mother looked tired again, like she'd been working late into the night. They took their usual spot in the 3rd row, and the businessman noticed how the little girl immediately began looking around the church with the same wonder she'd shown the week before. During the service, he found himself paying less attention to the pastor's words and more to the interaction between the mother and daughter. The way the woman patiently answered her daughter's whispered questions, the gentle way she brushed a strand of hair from the little girl's face, the pride in her eyes when her daughter tried to sing along with the hymns. It was clear that despite their financial struggles, there was so much love between them. The businessman had grown up in a similar situation, but he'd forgotten how rich that kind of love could make you feel. Even when your pockets were empty, after the service he lingered again, but this time he had a purpose. He watched as the mother and daughter walked toward the church's small fellowship hall, where other families were gathering for coffee and cookies. The little girl was chattering excitedly about something she'd learned in Sunday school, tugging on her mother's hand to hurry her along. The businessman followed at a distance, not wanting to seem like he was stalking them, but curious about their routine. In the fellowship hall, he saw the mother pour herself a small cup of coffee and help her daughter get a cookie from the children's table. They sat at a corner table, and he noticed how the mother only took a few sips of her coffee. Probably to make it last longer, several people stopped by their table to chat, and it was obvious that they were well-liked in the community. The little girl would light up when talking to the other church members, and her mother would smile genuinely, though he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. An elderly woman with silver hair approached their table and sat down. The businessman was close enough to overhear parts of their conversation. "How are you holding up, dear?" the older woman asked gently. The mother glanced at her daughter, who was busy coloring with crayons someone had provided. "We're managing, Mrs. Johnson. The overtime at the diner has been helping, and I picked up a few extra cleaning jobs on the weekends." "You're working too hard, honey. That little angel needs her mother to take care of herself, too." The mother's smile was tired but determined. "She's worth every sacrifice. I just want to give her the best life I can." The businessman felt his chest tighten. He remembered his own mother saying similar words when he was young, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat after his father left. The determination in this woman's voice was exactly the same as his mother's had been. After the fellowship time ended, he watched through the window as the mother and daughter walked to their car. It was an old compact car with a dent in the passenger door and a missing hubcap. The mother had to try the key several times before the engine finally turned over, and even then it sounded rough. As they drove away, the businessman made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of heading home to his penthouse apartment, he told his driver to follow them at a distance. He told himself he was just curious about where they lived, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. They drove through several neighborhoods, each one getting a little less affluent than the last. Finally, they pulled into the parking lot of a modest apartment complex. The buildings were old but clean, with small balconies and tiny patches of grass between the units. Children's toys were scattered around the playground area, and laundry hung from several of the balconies. The mother and daughter got out of the car, and the businessman watched as they climbed the stairs to a second-floor apartment. The little girl was carrying a small bag of groceries that looked like it contained just the basics: milk, bread, and a few other essentials, before going inside. The mother paused to water some plants she had growing in small pots on her balcony. Even in this humble setting, she was trying to create something beautiful. The little girl helped by carrying the small watering can, and they worked together in a comfortable routine that spoke of many evenings spent the same way. The businessman sat in his car for a long time after they disappeared inside their apartment. The contrast between their simple evening routine and his own lonely penthouse was stark. He usually spent Sunday evenings reviewing business reports or attending social events where conversations were more about networking than genuine connection. Over the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about them. During board meetings, he found his mind wandering to the little girl's prayer. While reviewing profit reports, he thought about the mother carefully counting out her offering money. When he ate at expensive restaurants, he remembered the small bag of basic groceries they'd carried upstairs by Thursday. He had made another decision that would have shocked his business associates. He drove back to the apartment complex, this time during the day. He told himself he was just checking on the neighborhood, but really, he was trying to understand their daily life better. He parked across the street and watched as the mother left for work, wearing a uniform that suggested she worked at a restaurant or diner. She kissed her daughter goodbye and handed her off to an elderly neighbor woman who apparently watched her during the day. The little girl waved enthusiastically until her mother's old car disappeared around the corner. Later that afternoon, he saw the mother return, looking exhausted but still managing to smile when her daughter ran to greet her. They spent time on the small balcony, the little girl showing her mother a picture she'd drawn while her mother was at work. Even from a distance, he could see the love and pride in the woman's face as she examined her daughter's artwork. That evening, he saw lights on in their apartment long after most of the other units had gone dark. Through the window, he could see the mother sitting at a small table, working on what looked like paperwork or bills. The little girl was curled up on the couch nearby, reading a book. It was a peaceful scene, but he could sense the weight of responsibility on the mother's shoulders. The businessman realized he was at a crossroads. He could drive away and forget about them, returning to his comfortable but empty life. Or he could find a way to help, though he wasn't sure how to approach them without seeming intrusive or making them uncomfortable. As he sat there in his expensive car, watching their simple evening routine, he made a decision that would change all of their lives. He couldn't ignore what he'd seen and heard. That little girl's prayer had opened something in his heart that he thought had been closed forever. And he wasn't about to let this opportunity to make a real difference slip away. The next Sunday couldn't come soon enough. The businessman spent the entire week planning his first move. He knew he couldn't just walk up to them and offer money. That would be awkward and might even scare them away. Instead, he decided to start small, with gestures that wouldn't immediately point back to him. On Wednesday morning, he drove to their apartment complex early, before the mother left for work. He had spent hours the night before at the grocery store, something he hadn't done in years. Usually his housekeeper handled all his shopping, but this time he wanted to pick everything himself. He had bought a gift card to the local supermarket, loaded with enough money to cover groceries for a month. But he didn't want to make it too obvious, so he chose a modest amount that would help without seeming overwhelming. He slipped the card into an envelope with a simple note that read, "For the sweet family from the third row. God bless." His hands were actually shaking as he walked up to their mailbox. He felt like a teenager doing something forbidden, even though he was just trying to help. He quickly slipped the envelope into their mailbox and hurried back to his car, his heart beating faster than it had during any business deal. That evening, he couldn't resist driving by to see if they'd found his gift. Through their apartment window, he saw the mother sitting at her small kitchen table, holding the gift card and the note. She was crying, but these were different tears from the ones he'd seen in church. These were tears of relief and gratitude. The little girl was jumping up and down excitedly, clearly understanding that something wonderful had happened. She kept hugging her mother, and even from the distance, he could see the joy on both their faces. The businessman felt something warm spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. But next Sunday at church, he watched them more carefully. The mother looked less tired, and there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. During the offering, she still counted her money carefully, but she seemed less stressed about it. The little girl was as cheerful as ever, whispering to her mother about the nice person who had helped them. But what really touched the businessman was what happened after the service. He heard the little girl tell another child, "Someone sent us a present, and Mommy says we should find a way to help someone else too." Even receiving help, this family's first thought was about giving back to others. That week, he decided to continue his anonymous assistance. He had learned from watching them that the little girl loved to read. Every evening he'd seen her curled up with a book on their small couch. So he contacted the church and offered to donate a collection of children's books to their library. He spent an entire afternoon at the bookstore, selecting stories he thought she would enjoy. Adventure books, fairy tales, books about animals and faraway places. He made sure to include some educational books too, ones that would help her with school. The store clerk probably thought he was crazy, this well-dressed businessman spending hours in the children's section, reading the back covers of picture books. When he delivered the books to the church, he told the pastor they were from an anonymous donor who wanted to support the children's program. The pastor was delighted and promised to announce the donation during the next service, the following Sunday. The businessman watched with pure joy as the little girl discovered the new books. Her eyes went wide with excitement, and she immediately began pulling books from the shelf, showing them to her mother. The mother looked puzzled but grateful, clearly wondering who could have donated such a perfect collection of books. But the businessman's favorite moment came when the little girl selected a book about a young girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor. She clutched it to her chest like it was made of gold and whispered to her mother, "This is exactly what I wanted to read." His good deeds continued throughout the month. When he noticed their old car struggling to start after church one Sunday, he arranged for a local mechanic to visit their apartment complex. He told the mechanic that someone had prepaid for any repairs the old car might need, and that it should be presented as a community service program. The businessman waited nervously all week, wondering if his plan would work. On Saturday, he drove by the apartment complex and saw the mechanic's truck parked outside. Through the window, he watched the mother talking to the mechanic, looking confused but grateful. The little girl was there too, asking the mechanic questions about how cars worked out by Sunday. Their old car was running smoothly. The businessman could hear the difference in the engine as they pulled into the church parking lot. The mother seemed amazed by their sudden string of good fortune, but the little girl had her own explanation. "I told you God was listening to my prayers," she told her mother as they walked into church. "He's just working in mysterious ways, like the pastor always says." The businessman smiled to himself. If only she knew how mysterious those ways really were. His acts of kindness became more creative as the weeks went on. He noticed that the mother always brought her lunch to work in a brown paper bag, probably to save money on restaurant meals. So he arranged for a local cafe to offer free meals to diner employees, claiming it was a new community outreach program. When he saw the little girl wearing the same winter coat she'd worn since the first Sunday he'd met them, he donated a collection of children's winter clothes to the church's clothing ministry. He made sure to include a beautiful purple coat in her size, knowing purple was her favorite color because he'd heard her mention it to her mother. The businessman found himself looking forward to Sundays like never before. Watching their reactions to his anonymous gifts had become the highlight of his week. He started attending the church's weekday activities too, just to see them more often. During a Wednesday evening service, he overheard the mother talking to Mrs. Johnson, the elderly woman who had befriended them. "I don't understand it," the mother was saying. "It's like we've been blessed by a guardian angel. First the grocery money, then the books, the car repair, and now all these other wonderful things. I keep wondering if I'm dreaming." Mrs. Johnson smiled knowingly. "Sometimes God sends help through other people, dear. Maybe someone heard your little one's prayer and decided to be God's hands and feet in your lives." The businessman felt tears prick his eyes. He had never thought of himself as anyone's answer to prayer, but maybe that's exactly what he had become. The little girl, who had been coloring nearby, looked up from her picture. "I think our angel is someone who goes to our church," she said matter-of-factly. I keep feeling like someone is watching over us, someone who cares about us." Her mother smiled and hugged her close. "Well, whoever it is, we're very grateful. And we need to remember to keep helping others too, just like we talked about." The businessman realized that his anonymous giving had created something beautiful. This family wasn't just receiving help. They were learning to trust in goodness again, and they were eager to pass that goodness on to others. The little girl had started bringing extra cookies to Sunday school to share with kids who didn't have snacks, and the mother had begun volunteering in the church nursery despite her busy schedule. As he drove home that evening, the businessman reflected on how much his life had changed. For years, he had focused only on accumulating wealth and building his business empire. But these past few weeks of secretly helping this family had brought him more satisfaction than any business deal ever had. He was beginning to understand that the little girl's prayer hadn't just been about finding a father for her mother. It had been about finding someone who would care enough to make their lives better. And somehow, in trying to answer her prayer, he had found something he didn't even know he was looking for, a purpose that went beyond making money, but he also knew that his anonymous help could only go so far. Sooner or later, if he really wanted to be part of their lives, he would have to step out of the shadows and reveal himself. The question was whether he had the courage to do it, and whether they would accept him when they learned the truth. The businessman's world of anonymous kindness came crashing down on a cold Tuesday morning in November. He was sitting in his office, reviewing quarterly reports, when his assistant knocked on his door with an urgent look on her face. "Sir, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about the apartment complex on Oak Street. She seems very upset." His heart sank. Oak Street was where the mother and daughter lived. He had bought the entire complex 3 weeks ago through a shell company, planning to improve the living conditions for all the tenants without raising their rent. It was supposed to be another anonymous good deed, but something had clearly gone wrong. "Send her in," he said, his voice tight with worry. The woman who entered his office was not the mother from church, but rather a stern-looking lady in her 50s wearing a business suit. She introduced herself as the property manager and wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Davidson, I need to inform you that several tenants are behind on their rent, and according to the previous owner's records, some haven't paid the full amount in months. The family in apartment 2B, for example, owes nearly 3 months' rent. I've already posted eviction notices." The businessman's blood ran cold. Apartment 2B was their apartment. In all his careful planning, he had forgotten to check the rental history before buying the property. He had assumed everyone was current on their payments. "Cancel the eviction notices immediately," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. The property manager looked confused. "Sir, if we don't collect the back rent, we'll lose thousands of dollars. The previous owner should have handled this before the sale. I said cancel them. All of them. And I want a full report on every tenant's situation by tomorrow morning." After the property manager left, the businessman sat in his office staring out the window. He had been so focused on his secret good deeds that he hadn't realized the family was struggling even more than he'd thought. The mother had been falling behind on rent while he was anonymously buying them groceries and books. That evening, he drove to the apartment complex with a heavy heart. He could see the eviction notice taped to their door, and through the window, he watched the mother sitting at her kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. She was crying while the little girl sat nearby. Clearly confused by her mother's distress, the businessman knew he couldn't let this continue. His anonymous help had been nice, but it wasn't enough. They needed real assistance, and they needed to know where it was coming from. He had to reveal himself, even if it meant risking their rejection. He spent the next 2 days planning what he would say. He practiced different approaches, trying to find words that wouldn't sound condescending or make them feel like charity cases. Finally, he decided that honesty was the only way forward. On Thursday evening, he knocked on their apartment door. When the mother opened it, her eyes were red from crying, and she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said gently. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm the new owner of this apartment complex. I understand there might be some confusion about the rent situation. The mother's face went pale. Oh, I'm so sorry. I know we're behind, and I saw the eviction notice. I've been working extra shifts, and I have most of the money now. Please, just give me a few more days. The businessman felt his heart break. Actually, that's not why I'm here. May I come in? I have something important to tell you. The mother hesitated, clearly worried about letting a stranger into her home, but something in his kind eyes made her step aside. The little girl looked up from her coloring book and smiled brightly. "You're the nice man from church," she said excitedly. "You always sit in the back row." The businessman smiled despite his nervousness. "That's right, sweetheart. I've been going to your church for a few months now." The mother looked confused. "I don't understand. What does this have to do with the rent?" He took a deep breath. "Ma'am, I need to tell you something that might sound unbelievable. I've been the one helping you all these weeks. The grocery cart, the children's books, the car repair, all of it. And I bought this apartment building because I wanted to make sure you and your daughter had a safe place to live." The mother stared at him in shock. "What? That's impossible? Why would you do that?" "Because I heard your daughter's prayer that first Sunday," he said quietly. "She asked God to send someone who would take care of you, and I realized that maybe I was supposed to be that someone." The little girl's eyes went wide with wonder. "You're our guardian angel," she whispered, but the mother's reaction was very different. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "You've been watching us? Following us? How is that any different from stalking?" Her voice was shaking. "I can't believe I let you into our home." The businessman raised his hands peacefully. "I understand why you're upset. I know this sounds strange, but I promise you I never meant any harm. I just wanted to help." "Help?" The mother laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? All this time, I thought we were just blessed with good fortune, and instead we've been someone's charity project." The little girl looked back and forth between them, not understanding why her mother was upset. "But Mommy, he's been so nice to us." "Sweetheart, go to your room and play for a few minutes," the mother said, trying to keep her voice calm for her daughter's sake. After the little girl reluctantly left, the mother turned back to the businessman. "I appreciate what you've done, I really do. But I have to ask, what do you want in return?" "In my experience, men don't help single mothers without expecting something." The businessman felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "I don't want anything in return. I just heard your daughter's prayer, and it reminded me of my own childhood. My mother raised me alone, and I remembered how hard it was for her." "So this is about your guilt over your own mother?" the mother asked, her voice still cold. "Maybe partly," he admitted. "But it's also about your daughter. She prayed for someone to take care of you, and I have the means to do that. I thought maybe this was meant to happen." The mother sat down heavily, looking overwhelmed. "You don't understand. I've been hurt before by men who promised to help and then disappeared when things got complicated. I can't trust someone I don't even know, especially someone who's been secretly watching my family." "I know how this looks," the businessman said desperately. "But I swear to you, I'm not trying to take advantage of you or your daughter. I just want to help because I care about what happens to you. Care about us?" The mother's voice cracked. "You don't even know us. You don't know our names, our stories, our dreams. You just know that we're poor and need help." The businessman realized she was right. In all his planning and watching, he had never actually gotten to know them as people. He had seen their struggles, but he hadn't bothered to learn who they really were beyond their financial situation. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. "I went about this all wrong. I should have introduced myself properly from the beginning instead of playing some kind of secret benefactor game." The mother looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to decide whether to trust him or ask him to leave. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Robert," he said. "Robert Davidson. I'm Lisa, and my daughter is Sophie. And you're right about one thing. We do need help. But we also need respect and honesty. If you really want to help us, you need to treat us like people, not like a charity case." Robert nodded eagerly. I understand. I'm sorry for approaching this so poorly. Could we maybe start over? Could I take you and Sophie to dinner tomorrow night, somewhere we can talk properly? Lisa hesitated. I don't know. This is all so overwhelming. Then Sophie peeked around the corner. Mommy, are you still mad at the nice man? Lisa sighed and looked at her daughter's concerned face. I'm not mad, sweetheart. I'm just confused. Sophie walked over to Robert and looked up at him seriously. Did you really hear my prayer? I did, Robert said, kneeling down to her level. And it was the most beautiful prayer I've ever heard. Sophie smiled. I knew God was listening. I just didn't know he would send someone so fancy. Despite everything, Lisa couldn't help but smile at her daughter's innocent observation. Maybe this strange man really was trying to help, even if he had gone about it in the wrong way. One dinner, she said finally. But somewhere public and Sophie comes with us? Robert's face lit up with relief. Of course. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain everything properly. As he left that evening, Robert realized that revealing the truth was only the beginning. Now he had to prove that his intentions were genuine and that he was someone they could trust with their hearts as well as their practical needs. The clock on the wall showed 2:15 a.m., but nobody in the Technova Solutions office was thinking about sleep. The CEO, David Kim, stood in front of a wall of monitors, watching his company's entire world crumble in real time. Red warning lights flashed across every screen. Error messages popped up faster than anyone could read them. The sound of phones ringing non-stop filled the air like an alarm that wouldn't quit. Sir, we just lost another client, called out one of the engineers from across the room. His voice was shaky, tired from working for 18 straight hours. That's 12 major companies down now. Their systems are completely frozen. David felt his stomach drop. 12 companies. That meant hospitals couldn't access patient records. Banks couldn't process transactions. Shipping companies couldn't track their packages. Thousands of workers couldn't do their jobs because of his company's mistake. The problem had started small, just like problems always do. One tiny glitch in their artificial intelligence system. Something so small that the computers should have fixed it automatically. But instead of getting better, it got worse, much worse. The glitch spread through their network like a virus, taking down system after system. Now it was threatening to destroy everything David had built over the past 15 years. What's the latest damage report? David asked his chief technology officer, trying to keep his voice steady. Inside he was panicking. This was the kind of crisis that could end careers and destroy companies overnight. We're looking at potential losses of over $200 million if we can't fix this in the next few hours, came the reply. The clients are already talking about switching to our competitors. Some are threatening to sue us. $200 million. David had heard those numbers before, but only in success stories. Never in disaster stories. Never when talking about his own company. He thought about his employees, about their families, about the promises he'd made to investors. All of it could disappear because of one stupid computer glitch. The engineering team was working frantically. These were some of the smartest people in the tech world. They had degrees from the best universities. They'd solved impossible problems before. But tonight they looked defeated. Their usual confidence was gone, replaced by the desperate look of people who knew they were running out of time. We've tried everything, said the lead engineer, rubbing his tired eyes. We've rebooted the servers, rolled back the code, even tried rebuilding the entire system from scratch. Nothing works. Every time we think we've fixed it, 10 more problems pop up. David walked over to the whiteboard where someone had drawn a messy diagram of their computer network. Lines connected boxes in a pattern that looked more like a spider web than an organized system. Numbers and code were scribbled everywhere. It was the kind of mess that happens when smart people are working under pressure and running out of ideas. Maybe we should call in outside help, suggested someone from the back of the room. There's a consulting firm in Boston that specializes in this kind of crisis. By the time they get here and understand our system, it'll be too late, David replied. We need to solve this ourselves, and we need to solve it now. He looked around the room at his team. Some of them had been with him since the beginning, when Technova was just 3 people working out of a garage. Others were newer, brilliant minds he'd recruited from big companies like Google and Microsoft. All of them looked exhausted. All of them looked worried. The office was a mess. Empty coffee cups were everywhere. Someone had ordered pizza hours ago, but most of it sat untouched on the conference table. Stress had killed everyone's appetite. The cleaning crew had given up trying to work around the chaos and had mostly stayed out of the way, except for one person. Maria Santos, the night housekeeper, continued her work quietly in the background. She'd been cleaning offices for Technova for almost 3 years now. She knew the building better than most of the employees. She knew which lights to turn off, which computers to leave running, and which coffee machines needed to be cleaned. Every night, Maria had started working at Technova when she first moved to the city. She needed a job that would let her work around her other responsibilities. During the day, she took English classes at the community college. In the evenings, she helped her teenage daughter with homework. The night shift cleaning job was perfect. Because it paid well and gave her the flexibility she needed, she'd seen plenty of late-night emergencies before. Software companies always seemed to have crises that required everyone to work through the night, but this felt different. Usually, the engineers would be excited, energized by the challenge of solving a difficult problem. Tonight, they looked scared. Maria understood more than people realized. Before cleaning offices, she'd worked at a shipping company doing data entry. She'd learned how computer systems worked, how information flowed from one place to another. She'd seen what happened when systems got overloaded, when too much information tried to move through pathways that weren't big enough to handle it. As she emptied trash cans and wiped down desks, Maria listened to the conversations around her. The engineers were using big technical words, but underneath all the complicated language, she could hear the real problem. Their system was trying to do too many things at once. It was like trying to push a river through a drinking straw. We need to check every line of code, one engineer was saying. There has to be a bug somewhere that we're missing. We've already checked the code 5 times, another replied. The problem isn't in the code, it's something else. Maria paused in her cleaning, listening more carefully. She'd heard this kind of argument before at the shipping company. The programmers would spend weeks looking for complicated problems when the real issue was something simple. Usually it was about the way information moved through the system. Not the information itself. She wanted to say something, but she knew her place. She was the cleaning lady. These were some of the smartest people in the tech industry. What could she possibly know that they didn't? But as she continued working, moving from desk to desk, Maria kept thinking about the problem. She'd seen the diagrams on the whiteboards. She'd overheard enough conversations to understand what was happening. And the more she thought about it, the more she was convinced that everyone was looking in the wrong place. The clock now showed 2:45 a.m. David was on another phone call with an angry client. The engineering team was still frantically typing code and running tests. And Maria continued her quiet work, watching, listening, and thinking about traffic jams and drinking straws and the simple solution that nobody else seemed to see.